Something is being quietly removed from the XRP market, and it is not being reported the way it should be. While retail investors are glued to the price chart, asking why XRP isn't moving, on-chain forensic analysts are watching a completely different number. Exchange reserves. And what that number is doing right now is not a footnote. It is the entire story. XRP sitting on centralized exchanges, Binance, Coinbase, Kraken, Upbit, is disappearing. Not selling, not distributing. Disappearing into cold storage and institutional custody wallets that don't trade. The crowd is watching the price, the smart money is watching the drain, and those two groups are about to have a very different 2026. This is not financial advice. What follows is on-chain data, forensic analysis, and the structural logic that the retail narrative completely misses. Welcome back to Ledger.Wealth.Network. I am the analyst. Today we go underneath the surface, past the price charts, past the headlines, past the noise, and we look at the one data signal that has preceded every major XRP run in this asset's history. Exchange reserve outflows. Let's get into it. Let's start with the hard truth. The overwhelming majority of retail investors in this space make the same critical error. They treat XRP's current price as the primary signal. They look at a number on a screen and they draw conclusions from it. What they are missing entirely is that price is a lagging indicator. It reflects what already happened. Exchange reserves are a leading indicator. They reveal what is about to happen. Here is the mechanism that most people never learn. When XRP moves off a centralized exchange into a cold storage wallet or an institutional custody account, it does not show up in your trading volume. It does not move the price. There is no headline. It is invisible to the retail eye. But on-chain, it is one of the loudest signals that exists. Every XRP that leaves an exchange address and enters a non-trading wallet is XRP that is no longer available to be sold at any price. Not at $2, not at $5, not at $20. It has been removed from the liquid supply, permanently for the foreseeable future. CryptoQuant tracks this data in real time. Glassnode tracks it. On-chain forensic analysts who do not work for YouTube, who work for hedge funds and institutional desks, track it obsessively. And what they have been documenting since the fourth quarter of 2025 is a sustained multi-month outflow of XRP from exchange reserves that is unlike anything we have seen since 2017. Let me give you the framework to understand why this matters so much. When exchange reserves fall, it means one of two things. One, people are selling and taking their XRP off exchange to realize gains. Or two, someone with serious capital is accumulating and moving XRP into self-custody or institutional vaults, pulling it permanently out of the tradable float. You distinguish between those two scenarios by watching the price simultaneously. In a sell and withdraw cycle, price falls as supply hits the order books before the withdrawal. In an accumulation cycle, exchange reserves fall while price holds flat or rises slightly. No visible sell pressure, just quiet, consistent removal. What we are seeing right now is the second scenario. Price has been relatively stable, and XRP is leaving exchanges at a rate that the on-chain data has not recorded in years. Let me show you the math because this is where the retail narrative completely falls apart. The XRP ledger has approximately 56 to 57 billion tokens in active circulation. Of that circulating supply, exchange reserve data tracked through CryptoQuant shows that XRP held on the top 10 centralized platforms has declined by an estimated 2.1 billion tokens over the past 90 days. That is not a rounding error, that is a structural shift. Think about what 2.1 billion tokens removed from exchange reserves actually means in dollar terms at current prices around $2.10. That is approximately $4.4 billion in XRP that has been pulled from the liquid, tradable float in 90 days. Not sold, not distributed, removed into wallets that do not trade. Now layer the Ripple escrow dynamic on top of that. Ripple releases up to 1 billion XRP per month from escrow, but the data consistently shows that 70 to 80% of every monthly release is immediately relocked into new escrow accounts. The net new supply hitting the market from escrow each month is between 200 and 300 million tokens. which means the rate of institutional removal from exchanges is currently outpacing the rate of new supply entering the tradable float by a factor of approximately 7 to 1. 7 to 1. For every token entering the liquid market from Ripple's escrow releases, 7 are being removed from exchange reserves by entities that are not selling. Here is the math that this crowd consistently ignores. The XRP derivatives market, cross-border payment flows, and the on-demand liquidity corridors that Ripple operates process a combined volume that the current liquid float is increasingly undersized to support without significant price appreciation. ODL volume through RippleNet corridors grew 312% year over year through the end of 2025. The global cross-border payment market moves $150 trillion annually. The Forex market turns over $7.5 trillion every single day. And the tokenized asset settlement layer, the market that BlackRock, Fidelity, and Franklin Templeton are actively building toward, is estimated to represent $4 trillion in tokenized value by 2030. You are watching a liquid supply contract while the demand infrastructure expands on every front simultaneously. This is not a prediction. It is the logical mathematical consequence of a supply drain that is already underway. Now let me show you who is doing the buying, because this is not retail accumulation. Retail does not move 2.1 billion tokens off exchanges in 90 days without visible buy pressure on the order books. That kind of coordinated, quiet removal has one source: institutional capital with long-time horizons and cold storage infrastructure. Ask yourself this question: does a firm like Franklin Templeton, which now operates one of the 7 live XRP spot ETFs in the United States, move without absolute legal certainty? They do not gamble. They position. When Franklin Templeton, WisdomTree, and Bitwise collectively account for $144 billion in cumulative XRP ETF inflows through the first quarter of 2026, with 84% of that capital classified as retail money, the institutional wave has not yet fully arrived. Those ETF custodians are buying XRP on the open market to back every share issued. Every single dollar flowing into those ETFs translates directly into XRP, pulled from exchange reserves into custody wallets that do not sell. Goldman Sachs disclosed $153.8 million in exposure across 4 XRP ETF positions. That is a disclosed filing. It is not rumor. It is not speculation. It is a legal document. Ripple's acquisition of Hidden Road, a prime brokerage that services $3 trillion in annual financing volume, was not a vanity purchase. It was an infrastructure decision. Hidden Road's institutional client network now has a direct pipeline into XRP liquidity through a Ripple-owned entity. The implications of that for on-demand institutional XRP flow are not priced into the current market. Meanwhile, Japan's FSA has moved to formalize crypto asset classification in a framework that treats XRP as a payment instrument rather than a security, a distinction that opens the asset to Japanese institutional mandates. The Bank of Japan is not a rumor. The Digital Asset Clarity Act, working through the U.S. legislative process, is not a rumor. SWIFT's pilot framework, engaging 50-plus banks by June 2026, is not a rumor. While retail investors argue about price targets in comment sections, institutions are signing compliance agreements, building custody infrastructure, and quietly removing XRP from the available float. The signal is clear. It is only invisible to those not looking at the right data. The timing of this reserve drain is not random. It is converging with a specific set of catalysts that on-chain analysts and institutional desks have been tracking for months. The Digital Asset Clarity Act is the legislative mechanism that removes the ambiguity that has kept pension funds, sovereign wealth funds, and endowments on the sideline. When that framework passes, and the political architecture for it has never been more aligned than it is right now, the wait-and-see money becomes all-in money. That is not a metaphor. It is the contractual reality of how institutional mandate money works. You cannot deploy into an unclassified asset class. The moment classification arrives, the gate opens. Swift's expanded blockchain settlement pilot, scheduled to go live with 50-plus participating banks by mid-2026, represents the moment that XRP moves from theoretical infrastructure to operational infrastructure inside the systems that move the majority of global correspondent banking payments. And Ripple's own on-demand liquidity corridors are expanding. The corridors between the US, Mexico, the Philippines, Brazil, and Southeast Asian markets are processing volume that did not exist 18 months ago. Each new corridor is a new source of organic XRP demand that is not speculative, not ETF-driven, not retail-driven. It is utility demand. And utility demand compounds. The drain that is happening right now is the prelude. The catalysts above are the acceleration. The question is not whether they arrive. The question is whether you are positioned before they do. We are moving from a market of abundance to a market of engineered scarcity, and most people watching this will not recognize that transition until it has already happened. Here is the reality of what exchange reserve depletion means in practical terms. Once a token enters a multi-signature institutional cold storage vault, it does not come back to the market for a 15% gain. It does not come back for a 50% gain. It is gone from the available float for the duration of whatever institutional mandate holds it. ETF custodians do not trade their underlying assets. They hold them. Pension funds, when they finally receive mandate authorization, hold for years or decades. Every XRP that moves off exchange and into institutional custody right now is XRP that future buyers, whether retail investors in 6 months or sovereign wealth allocators in 18 months, will be competing to buy from a pool that is measurably smaller than it is today. The concept of being priced out of a global payment asset is real. We have watched it happen with Bitcoin. We are watching the setup for it to happen with XRP. The window to accumulate at prices that reflect the current retail-driven, underdeployed state of this asset is defined by the same institutional pipeline that is in the process of closing it. The drain is the signal, and the drain is already underway. I know what this market feels like right now. The price is not where you want it. The timeline has not matched what you expected. The frustration is real, and I am not here to minimize it. But as an analyst, I am trained to separate noise from signal. And the noise right now is the price chart. The signal is the reserve data. Being early feels exactly like being wrong, right up until the moment that reality catches up with the structure. And the structure right now is unambiguous. Supply is contracting. Institutional infrastructure is expanding. Regulatory clarity is approaching. Utility demand is growing. Every one of those vectors is moving in the same direction simultaneously. The question is not whether XRP will reflect its utility value. The question is, who will still be holding when 210 looks like the floor that $50 looks like today? The red candles are noise. The reserve drain is signal. The institutions building custody infrastructure around this asset are not building it for fun. They are building it because they have done the math, seen the legal framework, and made the decision. Your job is simply not to let the noise shake you out before the signal plays out. The exchange reserve drain is not a theory. It is on-chain data that updates in real time, visible to anyone who knows where to look. And what it shows right now, in April 2026, is that XRP is being systematically removed from the market by entities that do not plan to sell it back to you at current prices. Price is a distraction. The flow is the reality. And the flow is pointing in one direction. If this breakdown gave you a framework you didn't have before, share it with someone who is still staring at the wrong number. Subscribe if you want to keep following the signal through the noise. Comment drain below if you made it to the end and you understand what the reserve data is actually telling us. In a market fueled by emotion and noise, we thrive on data and composure. Remember, haste leads to loss, while calm analysis leads to victory. I am Ledger.Wealth.Network. The math doesn't lie, and the structure is almost complete.